I'm Nicky Campbell. Now this week, Barclays boss Bob Diamond was asked why it was easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. He was stumped for an answer. We'll ask the audience. Our first big question, will bankers go to heaven? The man who blew the whistle on HBOS says most bankers love money far too much to get in. This week, the Law Commission said it was considering allowing prenuptial contracts to be recognised in court. So our next big question, would prenups undermine marriage? And lastly, it's claimed that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. 100,000 people are said to have converted in Britain, many of them young women. Our last big question, is Islam a better guide for life? Well, this mother and daughter say that living by Muslim rules makes more sense of their lives. We're live from the Samworth Enterprise Academy in Leicester. Great to be back here with a local audience. And sitting on high for us this morning, we have brought in for you the celebrated journalist and foreign correspondent Damien Leslie, from the Oxford Islamic Society, Myriam François Cerrah, and the director of the religious think tank Ekklesia, Jonathan Bartley. Morning to you all. Well, Jesus said, I'll tell you this, a rich man will find it hard to enter the kingdom of heaven. Matthew chapter 19, verse 23. It's not enough to keep the commandments. He said the rich should sell their possessions and give the proceeds to the poor. What would he have made of bankers' bonuses? Will bankers go to heaven? Alistair Heath, city editor of City AM. I mean, we're presuming there is a heaven. I mean, for some people, it's an if almost as big as Fred the Shred's pension. But let's go with it. When you hear about these big bonuses, for example, JP Morgan announced their 10,000 UK staff would be getting an average bonus. This is just the bonus, not the salary. An average bonus of £233,000. How do you feel?
I'm quite relaxed about it, unlike a lot of other people, because I think that what they're doing actually is, bonuses are taxed. There's a massive amount of tax being raised from bonuses and from bankers. In fact, last year, financial institutions paid £53 billion in tax. That comes from the bonuses, that comes from the profits. That was enough to pay for the entirety of Britain's armed forces, including our troops in Afghanistan, all our courts, all our police. So we need to look at it in the broader perspective, not just demonise bankers, not just focus on these kinds of issues. I don't agree that being rich is bad. I don't agree that doing well is bad. I think bailouts are bad, subsidies are bad, but we shouldn't tar all bankers with the same brush, and we shouldn't wage this vendetta against a particular part of the population while exonerating everybody else who's responsible for the crisis.
Do you think it's a vendetta, Barbara?
Absolutely. I think he's spot on. There's this...
Well, what about the rest of us, the age of austerity, the hard times that other people are facing with their limited wage increases? It's really, really tough for people like that. We hear about a £7 billion pot of bonuses for bankers, and some people are saying, are they without shame?
Well, most bankers are ordinary people too. They're hardworking, they're trying to pay their mortgage, not get laid off. There's this...
But it's not hard if you've got £1 million as a bonus to pay your mortgage, for heaven's sake.
That's the top 1%. There's a sense that bankers have become a punching bag for people to vent their anger at the state of the world, regardless if their issue is banking related or not.
Eric Lloyds of, Lloyds, his bonus is, Eric Daniels of Lloyds, Eric Daniels of Lloyds, his bonus 2.3 million this year. That's 100 nurses.
It's not, bankers' job is to make money. Their job is not to regulate themselves.
I have to say that I think they are being demonised. I think it's ludicrous. We have to kickstart the economy. And believe it or not, even though the bankers got us into difficulties, they are the people that are going to help us get out of it. Yes, you can't ruin the banking system.
David Jennings.
It was government that kickstart the economy by actually making funds available to the banks that were failing. And we need to recognise the importance of government injection of funds into banks. Will they go to heaven? Nicky, you raised that question about the notion of heaven. One of the difficulties we have with the notion of heaven is it becomes an excuse, doesn't it? In other words, you say to poor people or people that are marginalised at the bottom, don't worry too much about where you are now, because we'll make it all right at some other point. How people can take the sort of money we're talking about. Eric Daniels is leaving Lloyds anyhow, so it's not as if he's going to make any further contribution towards the banking sector.
But he worked for it.
He deserves his he had to be bailed out. His bank had to be bailed out by the government. Let's just look at some of the funds, for example.
In 1 second, Alistair Heath.
Actually, what he did was he stepped in and saved Halifax Bank of of Scotland, which was in crisis, he helped the government. The bailout was smaller thanks to what he did, and he's paying half his bonus in tax. He's paying 1.2 million pounds in tax, which is enough to employ probably 100 or 200 nurses.
And so he should, and he probably should pay a lot more as well. I mean,
he's already paying more than half his income in tax.
It comes down to relativity, doesn't it, about who actually really contributes towards society. I know a number of carers that give a lot of very personal time to some very personal issues that are on minimum wages. I would suggest that some of those people caring for some of the most vulnerable and marginalised people deserve far more than an £8 million payoff or a £2.5 million payoff or whatever.
Well, Eric's total package is about 8 million as well. I mean, who's worth more, him or a nurse?
I think that there's a point to be made that the city gives enormous amount to charity every year. I mean, and charities, you say, are they going to heaven? Well, they do give back in other ways. So.
Well, let me make a suggestion.
Andy Flanagan, Christian Socialist. David, in 1 second, please. Andy, desperately comment.
It's very easy to talk about charity, but I think we've got to get to a situation where we don't want to demonise people, but we do have to talk about the system that creates the potential where these things can happen. And we're doing the tabloid thing of being distracted towards talking about people and trying to demonise people, and actually it's the system needs changed. If that's allowed, if we're in a situation where we need to get these people in, we need to pay them these bonuses, we need to get the best people in, I want our best people being teachers, I want our best people being development workers, I want our best people being youth workers.
But the amounts of money, it was encouraged by, of course, the previous administration and David Cameron also in operation and in opposition, and Gordon Brown, because the tax that these people paid built hospitals, and this is the argument, and provided schools. That's why they had such a sort of laissez-faire atmosphere around.
Yes, but you're talking about now a bailout for that sector of £1.5 trillion. That's £31,000 for every taxpayer in the country. It's a huge bailout. There must be something wrong with the system, and we have to address it.
But they are paying it back, and very soon it will be paid back. I mean, I've got no axe to grind for bankers, but I do think we have to understand and accept that if we destroy the banking system, if we don't encourage the system that will help get the economy back on its feet, we are going to destroy Britain.
Yeah, well, I don't accept that you have to be paying those sort of salaries to have a banking system that works.
You do.
We're talking about the actual society fragmenting with an uber-rich and an underclass. And this relative inequality is a really important thing. It affects everybody's happiness. And we're talking about people making financial decisions who don't even actually understand. When bankers were asked what the median income in the UK was, a survey showed that they thought it was about 50,000. It's actually 22.6.
So they're completely out of touch with reality. Paul, in just a second. Jonathan Bartley, let me ask you a question, Jonathan. In the unlikely event that you were working in the city and you were given a bonus of, average bonus, £250,000. Once you'd paid your £125,000 to the Exchequer, the tax, which is a lot of money, what would you do with the rest?
I would love to be in that position. I did actually work in the city when I left school.
Would you keep that money, or would you give that money away? Because let's talk about Christian principles.
Okay, I mean, the bigger Christian principle for me is actually looking at the wider responsibility. So I'm worried about the demonisation of bankers. I'm worried that it lets the politicians off the hook. The politicians allowed us to get the banking sector so big that we couldn't let it fail.
Yeah.
They made so many profits, and then we have to bail them out. They're now back making profits again. We've got to learn from the mistakes. If we just demonise the bankers, we aren't actually going to address the underlying causes here. Which needs to, we need to break the banks up, we need to bring them down and have a different motivation to the banking system.
It's the moral ability to be able to take that enormous amount of money, £8 million over a year, for example, without compunction. That's what we're trying to address this morning. And Leslie.
Yes, I mean, you talk about we mustn't demonise the bankers. We should demonise the politicians, and demonise a lot of them, as far as I'm concerned. And I certainly don't think...
Daily Mail's very good at that.
Yes.
And I don't honestly think that we should praise the bankers for rescuing the bank system, which got into this mess, thanks to their own brilliance with financial products and so on. But we're confusing utilitarian argument, which is they pay tax, with a moral argument. I don't happen to believe, at least I hope there isn't a heaven, because if there is a heaven, there's a hell, and that's where I would be destined. But what is interesting is I think the difference between people who have enormous amounts of money here and seem to spend it on yachts and things, and in America, where you now have the richest men in the world, like Gates and Warren Buffett and people like that, who are going to give away their entire fortune before they die for good causes. The Gates Foundation is already doing saintly things in Africa for AIDS and things like that, and malaria. I think that there is a difference from the rich men in America. There is a kind of religious feeling for philanthropy. And I think, I can't remember, who is it? Was it Carnegie who said...
Andrew Carnegie gave all his money away.
Any man who ends up richer, when he dies on his deathbed, is richer than he was on his birth, is immoral.
Well, what about the atmosphere within? Andy, I mean, Paul Moore, you worked in HBOS as well, and you are a Christian. How did you feel? And you were getting big bonuses. Was there a big conflict between your heart and your wallet?
Well, can I just deal with the first question? Will bankers go to heaven? First of all, it's not for human beings to make judgments on other human beings, and I think that's a matter for God, if you believe in God. And I think a lot of bankers have fantastic values. I think sometimes what happens is that they leave their values at home when they come into the boardroom. And let me just say one or two things about the risks of money. There are 2,350 verses in the Bible on the misuse of wealth and property. You quoted one earlier, or two. And there are only 500 on prayer and faith, both which are very important in the Christian... and I believe Islam has the same kind of views on these matters. So it's very risky, indeed, to love money. The love of money can be the root of all evil because it makes you focus on yourself and not on others. And let's be clear about this. When remuneration consultants advise the remuneration committees of the boards of banks, they're in a position of conflict of interest. If they were to advise them to bring the pay down, do you think they'd ever get another assignment? They wouldn't. Stephen Hester, if it's true to say that his pay package will be 7 million a year, 7 million this year, is 280 times the average earnings. Cameron has said in the public sector it should only be 20 times top to bottom. Take John Lewis as a great example of a chief executive who's made that decision. As a matter of conscience, the top bankers should recognise that that is too much.
So conscience, you worked in the city, Kate, didn't you? How much conscience did you see at work there?
Well, very, very little. And in fact, one of the things that led to me leaving was this very cynical, and it's unavoidable, but this attitude that there'd be an earthquake, and the next morning there'd be a report on my desk saying winners and losers from the earthquake by construction companies in Taiwan, and they were still digging people out of the rubble. But I do want to come back to Vanessa's point about we've got to pay this money to get the best people, because I worked in these industries, and they are not the best people. The idea that this is our smartest and brightest, absolute rubbish. Now, coming back again to the bonuses issue and to the idea of people paying a lot of tax, in actual fact, the bad news is the people at the top of these companies getting the biggest bonuses, they pay the least tax. They spend the first £2,000 of their tax hiring a brilliant tax lawyer. They never pay another penny. Now, to answer the ultimate question, though...
Can I just say to you, some of them do get tax shelters and all sorts of things like that, I accept, but not all of them. There is a minuscule part of them that do that.
I have been working for a bank for 3 years when that was first offered to me.
The rest of them, I act for an enormous amount of bankers, and I see what tax they pay, what they contribute, I see what they give to charity, and I'm sorry, it is an over-exaggeration to say that all of them are in tax shelters.
We're back to the point again about charity, because we can't... Oh, sorry, Paul.
Can I give you some facts here? Mark Haldane of the Bank of England has done a detailed analysis about the costs of the banking crisis. And that's not just the direct costs of us bailing out the banks, but the indirect costs associated with everything. And it's somewhere between 1.4 trillion and 7.4 trillion pounds. It doesn't matter how much tax the bankers have paid, it doesn't pay for that. And the other thing that I really must say is that the parts of the banks that pay the biggest bonuses aren't doing banking business anyway. They're doing, I call it betting, that's a bit unfair.
There's hedge funds as well.
Proprietary trading.
Asset management.
Those are where the big bonuses are paid. That should not be allowed in a bank anyway.
Alistair wants to come back. Then Myriam, are we with you?
I think, first of all, not all bankers caused the credit crunch. Only a small percentage did. So we're saying bankers did this, bankers did that. It's deeply unfair, it's completely wrong. Some bankers did, some bankers didn't. So we shouldn't demonise the entire industry. That's the first thing.
But what about this world that they live in, which seems to be so detached from the reality
but it's
of
no
most other
different.
people?
That's absolutely right. They're detached. But it's no different to footballers, to CEOs of any companies, to entrepreneurs, to pop stars, to any of the thousands and thousands of people who make a lot of money. All these people are detached from reality. But I think we should stop waging this war against wealth. What we need is a sustainable economic system that doesn't create bubbles, doesn't require bailouts
No,
and so on.
it is
So we need
different.
reform.
It is different because we've got an economy that is largely based around these banks. It's based around debt. We have £1.5 trillion worth of debt. There is an industry that is feeding off particularly the vulnerable. And when you look at the impact on inequality in this country, it is causing higher rates of mental illness, it's causing higher rates of depression. There's a huge social impact of this inequality which is being fuelled by this industry.
Yeah.
So
I
this
disagree.
isn't just a small thing.
I don't think it's inequality. I think it's poverty. I think we need to tackle poverty, not inequality. We need to equip the poor, we need to educate them better, we need to help them, we need to motivate them, we need to train them. But by attacking the rich, you don't have the poor.
But the big illusion is that if we just raise growth, then we'll sort out poverty. Actually, it shows that we have been fueling this growth by debt, and actually it's been creating greater inequality and actually hasn't been tackling poverty where it's really needed.
Most of the debt is government debt. The government fueled this. For example, in America, they promoted subprime lending. Bill Clinton and George Bush are the ones who created subprime lending, which is at the heart of this entire crisis. This is a very, very complex set of issues. It's been massively oversimplified in the public discussion. What we need is to help the poor, absolutely, and we need to put in place reforms to stop bubbles and busts and crises, absolutely, but not by demonising everybody, not by waging war on the
Myriam
rich.
François, Cerrah, in Islamic world, of course, it's un-Islamic to make money out of money through interest. So a lot of the people, let's be stark here, a lot of the people working in the city are destined for the burning oils, aren't they?
No, I don't think it's, I think it was Russell Brand who said that it was tyranny is the absence of nuance. And I think it's a good time to quote him here because clearly there's an absolute lack of nuance in this particular analysis.
Do you feel there is demonisation of these people?
Well, of course there is, but I have to say something that Barbara said, was it Barbara, that really struck me. She said, bankers are here to make money, not to regulate themselves. Actually, we're all here to regulate ourselves. We all have a moral responsibility to regulate our behaviour and to make sure that our behaviour is in line with our ethical ideals. There is nothing ethical about the city. My father's a banker. I know the city quite well. And there is a culture of excess that nobody who knows a little bit about the city can deny. And that's where I say that the regulation has to come from the self. It can't come from the outside, and it can't come from laws.
Yeah, I think you highlighted a point I was just about to make, which is that no one really distinguishes between the legal and ethical breaches. I mean, going to hell, you're saying, no one behaved illegally, no one broke any laws in the city. It's everyone was working within the system that was created by the politicians, and they're making as much money as they can in that system.
I don't agree with that.
Ethical breaches is another issue. A lot of bankers said, this may or may not be wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Do you think poor people were on the margins of legality?
I don't agree with that, and I'll tell you why. Because although PwC have just supposedly done an investigation into RBS and said there was no dishonesty, there was just bad decisions, I can tell you, as a regulatory expert, failing to act with due skill, care and diligence is a breach of one of the most important regulatory requirements under the regulatory regime. And there was certainly major inference that there were decisions taken not within that regime. And so I think that's a very important point to make.
Okay.
Well, I guess just, as an atheist and an ex-banker, to get back to the question itself, my observation from being on the ground and my view from my atheist background is that bankers certainly don't go to heaven, but what they do go to, unfortunately, is the Bahamas.
Nicky, this is getting back to the question.
But it is getting back to the question, but is wealth per se a bad thing, David Jennings? What about wealthy Christians?
Well, in one sense, wealth isn't a bad thing. There's two factors to it.
Yeah.
One is, how does the government deal with excessive wealth? And the way they should be dealing with it is through taxation, to make sure that the money does come back in to actually fund things that are good and necessary.
I think they are,
yeah.
50%.
Well, yeah. I don't think that's enough.
90% tax rate,
hold on a minute.
tax rate.
Let's just take what Bob Diamond said to the Select Committee. I mean, he's earned 75 million over the past 5 years, and he's due to earn 11.5 million, I think, this year, including his £8 million bonus. Okay, so he pays 50% tax tax on that. That still leaves quite a bit. What does a person like that actually spend that sort of money on? Now, Nicky, you identified certain people in America and Anne did. There was a philanthropy that was around at the time, as there was in Victorian England. But I don't see that now. I mean,
Bill Gates has still got a bob or two,
Nicky,
even after the philanthropy.
This is where it does come back to the question, because when Jesus said, you know, it's difficult to get into the kingdom of heaven if you're a rich man, he wasn't talking about, you know, whether or not you win the ticket to get off to the disembodied place. He was talking about, you know, the kingdom of heaven, which is about bringing justice, peace, beauty, compassion in this place, bringing heaven on earth. And the reality is, if we are too separated from the rest of society, it's a real struggle to be part of helping that broken world. Those philanthropists have got into that stuff because they've been to Africa, they've seen the situation, and actually, so the vast difference in wealth can actually separate us from our fellow man, fellow woman. And actually, we don't then get involved in that amazing adventure of bringing heaven and earth, of bringing peace and justice and beauty to this place.
And there is a disconnect in the city between those lives and real lives.
There is absolutely, but I think it's unfair to say there's no philanthropy in the UK in general. Okay, there's been an explosion in philanthropy in the UK. I think in America it's different. It's actually a more capitalist system. America's more capitalist. It's more open to people making money, but in return, people are expected to give back voluntarily. Now, I'm all in favour of that, but when you're waging war against people who make money, when you're demonising wealth, and when you're saying that basically
we're saying time and again, it has to be the
make
systems that we talk about, not the people. And so there are options now. There is the idea of separating retail and casino banking, saying continue with your financial creativity, continue with your innovation, but please do it with your own money. Don't do it with our money. Don't do it with high street money. Separate the bank. And also the Robin Hood tax, a tax on financial transactions, cross-border financial transactions, a very small tax in that would really create an amazing tax.
That tax on financial transactions would kill 300,000 jobs in London. It would be a disaster.
That's not the analysis of a lot of folks.
Northern Rock wasn't a casino bank, okay? Barclays, which has these trading operations, was not bailed out by the taxpayer, okay? HSBC, which is a universal bank, was not bailed out. Again, we need to not oversimplify.
But it's layman's.
David Jennings.
Barclays would not have survived unless there'd been bailouts of other banks and certain other changes that were necessarily made.
Do you think people, just go back to the moral ethical question on this and the whole notion of entering the kingdom of heaven, do you think with that amount of money, the 8 million that we're talking about over the whole package, it's very difficult not to lose, in the words of one politician, your moral compass?
Yeah, I think they're immoral earnings, actually, and there's certain people that make money out of immoral earnings, and I think that kind of level of earnings...
J.K. Rowling makes that amount of money. Are those immoral earnings?
Yeah, I mean, that's why... I've forgotten, Alistair, is it?
Yes,
yeah. I mean, you lumped all sorts of other people together. That's fine, I'd lump them all together as well. Yeah. And I don't actually think there's anything...
Paul McCartney,
specific.
is that immoral, what he makes?
Well, it all depends what happens with it, doesn't it?
Do you think there should be a limit on earnings? Do you think there should be a maximum earning limit?
At the end of the budget speech, George Osborne is not looking over his shoulder to see what Paul McCartney thinks of his speech. The market is meant to be... I'm not saying the market's a bad thing. The market is meant to be our servant to help the society work, but actually at the moment we are slaves to the market. We are slaves to the banker.
Yeah, so you believe in a maximum wage. Okay, I mean, I totally disagree, but it's good that you're stating a position. I think we should be open about these things. Okay, I don't think there should be a maximum wage. I don't think there should be punitive taxation. I think there should be a massive program to help the poor, to help people progress in life, to mentor them, to help people with mental illness and so on. But I don't agree with the maximum
the
wage.
adjective punitive is if there's something fundamentally wrong with taxation. Taxation is a good thing because it enables money to be put to good and useful purposes. So, I think, you throw those kind of words in as if there's something specifically bad about it.
We have to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you. And we'll see you all in heaven, all right? You can join in that debate by logging on to bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions and follow the links to our message board, which is a lively read. We're also debating live this morning from Leicester, would prenups undermine marriage, and is Islam a better guide for life? So tell us what you think about those topics, or send us any general comments you'd like to make about the programme. All that I am, I give to you, and all that I have, I share with you. Except the house I bought before we met, my expected inheritance, and my extensive collection of Phil Collins CDs. So, if the Law Commission endorses prenuptial contracts, the vow to love someone for richer or poorer might become irrelevant for everyone, not just the super rich. So, would prenups undermine marriage? Divorce lawyer. And she's got many bankers as well. No doubt you've had to deal with sizable fortunes if your friends are bankers when you've been dealing with their divorces. But you actually, Vanessa, you have a thing that you're offering called a pre-nup Valentine's package.
Yes,
How
it's a
romantic.
pre-nuptial voucher for you to give to someone on Valentine's Day. This followed in the wake of me doing divorce vouchers for Christmas. Now, what I would say to you is I do believe that there is a place for prenups and post-nups. And I do think that people who are autonomous, grown-up people who enter into a relationship should have the right to decide how they want their assets to be dealt with. God forbid the marriage comes to an end.
This is a triumph of cynicism
No,
over
it's
love.
not. It's practicality in a world where at least we're moving to 1 in 2 people who are married are getting divorced, and we have to be practical about it. It stops the arguments. I do a lot of them now, and it prevents arguments in the event that the marriages come to an end. I don't believe it should be across the board. I do believe that the court should still have some input into deciding what's fair and reasonable, but I do think they have their place, and I think to disregard them would be nonsense. The rest of Europe and most of the world have them. Why don't we?
The Bishop of Blackburn put it well, didn't he, when he said there was a danger of cheapening sacred commitments into balance sheets.
Well, it's not. It's being practical about 2 people wanting to decide what should happen in the future. And people who love each other and trust each other can sit down and do this. Yes, it is unromantic, and yes, I don't think it's right for everyone. But for where, for example, people are married for the 2nd time or 3rd time, and they want to protect their assets for children of a previous marriage, why should they not be entitled to do so?
Jonathan Myers, barrister, why not be entitled to do so? It's entirely practical. Go into it with your eyes open.
If Vanessa thinks that lawyers can't argue over a contract, then I've got some unpleasant news for her. She seems to think that I don't want to undermine this lady's business proposal. It's clever marketing. But the problem with what's happened here is that a group of judges in the Supreme Court, who weren't voted for by anybody, have significantly changed a very important part of the social fabric and understanding of who we are.
But that's what judges do every day of the week.
They don't, with respect, because what you're left with is giving people these Valentine's Day vouchers to write a contract that you can't say whether it will be valid in 20 years or not, because there aren't any guidelines as to what will be and won't be a valid contract. But on the principle of the thing, and that's really the important point. I'm not here to say that marriage is in some way a fixed institution that hasn't changed over time, because thank heavens it has. It's become a modern, vibrant, and most importantly, equal partnership. And that hasn't always been the case. You know, women have fought for hundreds of years to get to the point where upon divorce, there is an equal separation of assets.
Absolutely. And it's mostly women that are coming in for the prenups
Vanessa,
now.
with respect, what this does is it's a retrograde step. Because this contract says that if I'm very wealthy, I'm not a banker, and I marry someone who isn't, then I can impose that inequality upon them in a way which sets us back hundreds of years.
No, you're not imposing.
It doesn't undermine marriage as being some kind of very old-fashioned, Pride and Prejudice situation. It undermines marriage in the 21st century by saying if I'm very wealthy and I've got clever lawyers, I can screw you into the ground.
Yes, but the point is you have to have legal advice for it to be binding. There mustn't be any duress, and there's a basic buzzword for this. It has to be fair. So,
in other words, lots of jobs for people like you.
Absolutely. I won't go to heaven either.
And Leslie. It's just not against the whole idea of love and romance.
For heaven's sake. I mean, marriage from time immemorial has actually been very based on material wealth, property. And you remember all those rows, well, if you read history, about the Married Women's Property Act. It was argued that because this act said that a wife could keep the money and the property that she had when she married, instead of it all becoming her husband's. And people said, this is going to destroy marriage. So the same arguments go on all the time. I personally think that a prenup is quite sensible. Yeah, quite sensible. In fact, I've been married to the same man for 42 years, but in the end, I earned more than him because of the kind of job I was in. And if he sort of ran off with a floozy and said, well, I'm going to take all that money, I would have liked to have had a prenup.
But when you married that person, you never anticipated leaving them, because that's what marriage is. It's not cohabitation. It's not dating someone. It's saying you never want to leave them. And that in and of itself is undermined. But that in and of itself is undermined by the fact that you're saying here's the gift
marriage is people can't be bothered to get married in the first place. That is what is undermining marriage.
Absolutely. And we know statistically that if we have these prenups, that the marriage rate will increase, because what's been putting men off
what kind of marriage will it be? What kind? David Jennings, would you, if you were marrying somebody in church, before you say what you want to say, if David, if you were marrying somebody in church, and would you be quite relaxed about marrying someone who had a prenup?
Yes, of course.
Would you mention it in the sermon? Everything's
probably,
going to be...
Probably not, in the same way as I wouldn't mention their personal and private insurance details. You know, there's no cheapening of marriage, providing they pay my fees. There's no cheapening of the marriage.
All that I have, I share with you, David. But all that I have, I share with you.
The point about this is you don't have to do it, right? You don't have to enter in the prenup. It's a voluntary arrangement that people might wish to make in the cool, clear light of day. But the other point of it is, it's a bit like an insurance policy. Now, when you take out fire insurance on your house, you don't think about your house burning down, and you don't want your house burning down, but you actually take the necessary prevention and provision in case the awful should happen. And I don't believe for one moment that people come into my church to get married are actually thinking about when the marriage is going to break up. That's the last thing that's on their mind, and I know that's the case. But sometimes things do go wrong, and that's terrible when they go wrong. But at least then there's some protection.
You're ready for Charles, what do you say about this? Charles Perry.
You're looking at this from the wrong end of the telescope. You're looking at it from the ending. You need to think about this at the beginning, and it seems to me really difficult for somebody to say, I'm in this for the rest of my life, when you've already negotiated your exit strategy. The second thing is that when marriages get into difficulty, where there's the existence of a prenuptial agreement, you cannot guarantee on the part of the partner that they're really interested in restoring the relationship. There's always at the back of your mind, is this part of the strategy to get out?
The existence of a prenup, I don't think, will have any effect on whether the marriage actually breaks down or not. There'll be all sorts of other reasons as to whether that might or might not happen. And I would suggest that even the existence of a prenup doesn't actually then indicate that a marriage is going to break down.
David, this fire alarms example is wrong-headed, because if 30% of houses burnt down, we wouldn't be looking at what the fire alarms were like. We'd be looking at how the houses were built. So
you'd be looking at increased insurance premiums.
No, you wouldn't. You'd be looking at how it was built. Now, in answer to Vanessa's point, actually, in 2010, when prenups became legal, the number of marriages entered into actually went down. So there's no suggestion whatsoever that this is increasing the rate of marriage.
I want to be thinking, Jonathan Bartley, as a Christian, are you not, and you know, this is a vow before God. There surely can be no caveats to that.
I think prenups are a symptom of the problem, and that is that we've made marriage into a contract rather than a covenant. And the Christian idea of marriage is that it's a covenant that you don't go in bargaining. You go in saying, I'm going to commit myself to you because I love you. And then you invite a response from the other person, they do the same. So it's not a negotiation. But unfortunately, because of the alliance of church and state marriage, you know, in law, that contract is instantly instituted as soon as you make the covenant. And also the government can change the contract anytime they like because they have control over your marriage. Now, we need safeguards. We need people to be protected when the relationships break down. But I think as soon as you start talking about contracts, you lose that wonderful essence of marriage, which is that covenant giving to the other person.
But you would want, in the event of a dreadful thing happening like this, but you would want to keep your drum kit, for example, wouldn't you? That'd be very important to you.
The drum kit would be very important, and I'd want some safeguards in law about being able to hold on to that. But the important thing is, I've been prepared to give the drum kit to my wife, and no greater love has a man.
Myriam, it's far more contractual in Islam, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. I mean, whilst we obviously, you know, marriage is the union of two hearts, and we don't over-idealise, which is the way that I see it. That, you know, it is a covenant, but it's a contract, and it's a contract between two parties who have interests and who have rights. And in that contract, particularly as a woman, you know, especially sort of in societies where there weren't as much, or there wasn't as much sort of regulation of these affairs by the states, it was a way to protect your interest. You said, when I get married, things go wrong, I get the house, I get, you know, this amount, I will be remunerated for the hours I put into housework. So you could integrate all of these things into your contract, and God forbid they would be there in stone and
well, there's that famous line by P.J. O'Rourke, isn't there? Divorce, next time I'm going to miss out the middle bit, I'm just going to find someone I hate and buy them a house. house. You know.
But you know, in America they have this thing called
second marriages as representing the triumph of hope over experience.
But you know, in America they now have this convention of what they call starter marriages. You marry for a fairly short time when you're, you know, madly in love and everything. Then you realise that being madly in love is not enough, and it never has been. And your second marriage, as the one you hope will last, is your main marriage. You have the starter marriage. I think actually a starter marriage is rather a good idea for a lot of people. But the problem is that people seem to think that the Milton Boone, the romantic thing,
lasts forever.
It lasts forever. And also, it's actually a very recent development that we think of marriage as romantic. Marriage is to do with romance and everything. Islam, I have to say, is quite sort of smart about this. I'm not going to concede any more to you.
No, I know you're not.
But, you know, it realises it's a contract.
Yeah.
And it always has been a contract.
Well, what if you fall head over heels? Has anyone here ever fallen head over heels in love with anyone?
Yeah. Yes, of course.
About half a dozen people. You have, haven't you?
Yeah. I'm actually the National Secretary for the Councils for Divorced, Separated and Widowed. So
that's why I come to you, because you've been married, you've been in a long-term partnership, and the next time, if you ever get married again, why are you going to be absolutely certain that you have a prenup in place?
Because after my marriage broke up, that was great. Everything was amicable. I went then into a relationship where I had my own home and everything else. That relationship ended. I lost everything. I absolutely lost everything. And why should I or anybody else work damn hard for what we get to have somebody else come in and nothing, and we've lost it.
Susan.
I was going to say that being married doesn't entitle you to half of your spouse's income. And yes, you may be in love when you get married, but when you get divorced, I'm pretty sure you're not in love. And that why would you give half of your money away to somebody who you don't love? And many people these days don't get married because they love somebody. Many women, I mean, look at Hugh Hefner. He's been married to what? How many playmates? And you know, it's all for the money. It's all for the plastic surgery.
I disagree with you, but in law now in England, you do have to give half your capital away as a starting point, not half your income, but you do, and it's because of those draconian laws that people aren't getting married, and we're suggesting they should have prenups.
I agree with you. I agree with prenups. I agree that it's a sensible, logical idea, and I agree that there should be a contract, and I don't think that it makes somebody not fall in love with you, and I don't think it means I don't love you. It means that I love you, but I want you to show your love back by trusting me and marrying me when you know that you're not going to get anything from it.
So let's get some audience on this, yes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably a while off having to worry about marriage yet, and with my current student debt, I probably won't have much to offer in a prenup. Fundamentally, I just find it so unromantic. I just can't picture myself there on bended knee with a ring in one hand and a contract in the other. I think just give 110%.
This is a gentleman in white shirt. Hi, good morning.
God says that he hates divorce, and I think it's not the beginning of marriage, it's the end. It's sort of 7 years in when it becomes tough, and you have to have a commitment.
Work at it.
You have to work at it, absolutely. You have to decide. And if you've got these temptations, well, it's okay, you know, I've got that.
An exit strategy.
If you've got an exit strategy, you may not work at it.
Yeah, and why shouldn't Rupert Malley have a prenup next time?
Well, one of the major dangers is that you're in love with somebody when you marry them, and it's a voluntary thing to do. You don't have to do it, you choose to, but the real danger is that you're handing over a contract to someone, and in their eyes, this contract is as likely to be enforced as they are to become world heavyweight boxing champion. They don't see that this is going to end, so therefore they're not really going to believe or necessarily scrutinise what that document says. So go ahead, but I'm not entirely sure that you'll get what you hope for.
Sorry, we're talking about contracts here, and I think people are getting the ideas that we're going to walk down the aisle with a contract, and the vicar's going to be at the end there and handing our contract. This is something that has to be thought about. When you're in a relationship, you think about things like your house insurance, your car insurance, even starting a family.
With respect, you also think about whether to get married.
Issues.
You also think about whether to get married.
This is another important issue
you
as
have
well.
the choice. If you
but
don't
this can be done further down the line. It doesn't have to be done on the day. It can be done
For
further
second
down the
marriages,
line.
third marriages, maybe it's okay. You wanted to come in. You're desperate to come in.
I think prenups are a wonderful idea. I think that so many people in the sort of enthusiasm, the flood of hormones, the excitement, the Mills and Boon moment, they've seen Hugh Grant on the TV and that's it. They rush into these things, into these excited relationships, and they haven't sat down and actually thought about the detail of how the relationship is going to work.
What parallel universe do you live in? People actually do fall in love, but then, and this is what Anne Leslie said earlier about having this romantic idea about marriage. In fact, it's the transition from being in love to loving, which is about doing loving things for one another, building up the trust that you need in order to sustain this. And if you're holding out some part of your estate, your wealth from that relationship, it doesn't build the trust.
Everybody keeps saying, well, things might change, but that's actually the whole point. Things will change. The Spice Girls have fooled us, to become one. It's to becoming one. It's a gradual, I know me and my wife, it's a gradual process of getting to know each other and loving each other, and it's a ridiculous and a hard and a messy thing.
I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want, a prenup. It's not very romantic, is it? It's not romantic, is it?
That's what I'm saying, Nicky, that's what I'm saying. It's the decision of getting married is a serious decision, and things will change, but the person you are then will be a vastly different person 10 years' time. So you're making a contract, an arrangement, and in 10 years' time you will have moulded towards each other, you'll have changed, you'll have gone different directions. That might be totally nonsense in 10 years' time because things will change.
David, in a marriage that you preside over where there is a prenup, which you absolutely approve of, although you said you wouldn't mention it necessarily in the sermon, when people give presents, and people said, look, David, I want to be minded about the prenup, and I want to give presents accordingly. I just want that's just for the bride, or would you approve of that?
I don't think that's a very sensible thing to do. I mean, the other.
But isn't it the logical extension of what you're saying?
No, it's not, because as I said earlier, you don't inquire about their house insurance or all those other kind of provisions they would have made in the event of something that they don't want to happen actually might happen. But could I just take another technical thing, picking up something Jonathan was saying, that certainly in the Western Church, of which the Church of England is part, it is a contract in the sense that the couple marry each other. The ministers of the sacrament in marriage are the couple. The priest is only there to give his or her blessing on what they are doing. So there is that, it is they that are carrying it, and it's they that are making the decisions, and they will bring to it whatever they want, including perhaps a prenup.
I would like the state to insist on prenups, because the state is involved in marriage anyway, as we know.
Okay.
And once the state is involved in marriages, it takes it away from the husband or the wife.
We have to leave
the
it.
state says if you have endless breakup marriages, you end up with impoverished women.
Okay, we have to leave it there, and I'm sure marriage will come into our next discussion as well. I wish you well in your romantic quest, sir. Thank you all very much indeed. You might have some thoughts about that debate, so please share them with us. Log on to bbc.co.uk /the big questions. Follow the link to our message board, or send us your thoughts about our last big question: is Islam a better guide for life? And if you'd like to be in the audience at a future show, email audience@mentorn.tv. Right, we're in Bristol next week, Bury on the 30th of January, and York the week after that. Well, a recent study from Swansea University estimated that over 5,000 Britons converted to Islam last year, and most of them are white women with an average age of 27. Why? Is Islam a better guide for life? Well, let's talk to Myriam and Susan. Mother and daughter, good morning to you both.
Morning.
Thank you for coming in. You both converted, but separately.
Yeah.
How has it transformed your life, Myriam?
It gives it structure, and it's an explanation for why we're here and what we're meant to be doing, where we've come from, and what's going to happen when we die. And you know what you're doing on earth, and you know what God wants you to do.
It's very clear.
Yes.
It's almost it's a random and chaotic and confusing world. I think we can all appreciate that, but it gives you a structure and a certainty, in a sense.
I suppose, yes. I think the one thing that I would agree with is that it's black and white. It's clear that there's no grey area. You don't get confused.
It's all or nothing as well, isn't it?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I suppose that's a grey area. But people think that You do something, and if you don't do that, then you're sinning. If you're not praying, then you're not a Muslim. If you're not eating halal, you're not a Muslim. And that's not how Islam works. Islam is all about what's in your heart. And it's not a club either. It's not you're in, you're going to heaven. There's lots of little things that can take you out, and there are lots of things small things that you wouldn't even think about that can put you into heaven. It's not necessarily a clear-cut case in that sense, which is something that I actually liked about Islam.
Yeah. There are challenges, but also there are aspects of it which trouble people, as you know. And one of the things is that something I think that you approve of, because you know people in this situation who are second and third wives. Does that work?
It has to work because it's permitted. Once you have discovered that the Quran is the word of God, what Allah says, then you submit your own opinions on these things and your own fallible reasonings, and you know that God knows better than you do.
You were telling me earlier on before the programme, you know of somebody who wanted her best friend to marry her own husband.
Yeah. Do you know, actually, I know women who are more interested in this than men. You know, there are women going, I just wish my husband would get a second wife. And you've got to understand that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, men could have any amount of wives they wanted, and they didn't have to treat them better than you could just go over to your wife, use her as some sort of drive-in, and then just leave.
Why can't you have several husbands?
Because there would be problems with paternity. I mean, what about pregnancy? If I had two husbands, how would I know which one was the father? So
that's the logic. So you come back to the logic.
Also in Islam, it's the man's duty to look after the woman. So I would be being looked after by two men, and therefore one woman would probably be missing out because of me.
Okay, what do you think about this aspect?
Well, I think it's really worrying. I think it shows us that there's something deeply wrong with a lot of our Western culture, that women are actually looking at a religion as misogynistic and as deep set against women as Islam, and thinking this might be a better choice. I mean, it really is the devil in the deep blue sea to me. If there's something that seems appealing about Islam, and when you say that it gives you structure, well, that's great, but you can choose to have structure in your life. You can choose to follow whatever rules you like. You can choose to make rules about what you eat, what you drink, where you go out, all this kind of stuff. You can choose all those, and that's very different from suddenly deciding that because you want to choose all those things, you're going to conveniently decide to believe in a mythical cloud-dwelling deity, completely illogical, superstitious.
It's not a convenient decision. This is logic. It's pure fact and logic.
Well, there's no logic to believing in a deity for which there is no empirical evidence. That's not logic. That has to come out of a choice, or out of a faith, or out of...
Oh no, most people believe in God.
To be going out partying. I would. I'm 19 years old. I would much prefer to be out partying. I'd much prefer to be putting lots of makeup on and doing those things. But
right, I understand your point of view. No, I can sympathise with that. If you would prefer to be doing that, but because of what you believe, you're going to follow the rules of what you believe. But what I understand your mother is saying is that she likes that structure and she wants that. And so if you're coming at it from that point of view, that to me doesn't make sense.
But the thing about I was getting to the point is that I didn't want. It's not something you choose. It's not something that I went, right, well, I'd really like to wear all black all the time, or wear Islam. That's the answer.
You could have just been a goth.
There are as well so many choices in our society, aren't there? And yet you've, in a sense, limited your choices. I mean, Christopher Hitchens, the writer, said basically that it's the ethics of 7th century Arabia, and he said the Quran is derived from tedious local quarrels between unlearned villagers. And I suppose the question he and others of that ilk might ask is, why are you retreating from the modern world into the 7th century?
There's nothing even approaching the truth. The Quran is the word of Allah, is God's actual words. And once you've ascertained that for yourself, once you've verified it with history and observation of your own, scientific reasoning and logic, once you've
scientific reasoning and logic would tell you the exact opposite. Instead, you're accepting this ancient book which says horrible things about women, about gay people, about anyone who doesn't. I've read a great deal of it, and it is absolutely loaded with hate speech. People use it to justify vicious violence.
You do know in the Quran it says that women and men are equal. If you've read, I've read the Quran and I know what the Quran says about women. Have you read the Quran to be able to be making those points?
Susan, more in a minute. More in a minute, please. More in a minute. Myriam François, Cerrah, what sort of structure has it given your life?
Well,
Because you were a Catholic before.
I was, yeah.
Once a Catholic, not always a Catholic.
There's lots of structure in Catholicism too. But now I'd like to come back to 2 points. Firstly, I don't think in a liberal society there's any lessons to be given for a decision that's come to by consenting adults, be it polygamy, homosexual relationships or other. People are consenting adults. If that's what they want to do, frankly, I don't really see why any of us have anything to say about that, firstly.
Polygamy?
Secondly, it doesn't have to be legally recognised. This is a consenting decision.
An arrangement.
But yeah, as an arrangement. I'd also like to come back to what you were saying about it being pie in the sky and that sort of stuff. The research by Kate Zabiri, who's done research into Muslim converts, suggested actually Muslim converts come to the decision after an extended period of research, intellectual and cognitive research into the religion lasting several years. This is what the research says. A majority of them have investigated other religions, and the conclusion of that research is that they decide to abide by that faith. Now, you can't then override women's statements for themselves, particularly not as a feminist, and I can't understand quite how you think that that's a fathomable position to hold, when women are saying for themselves that this is the process that they've been through, and this is the conclusion that they've come to.
Well, Dayman, allow me to come to Dayman, because I know you were desperate to come in. I slightly cut you off at the end of the last debate. What do you think of these young white, mainly female converts?
Can I just say that I have read the Quran. I was born in a Muslim country. I work a lot in Muslim countries. I feel that all the people of the book actually are in patriarchal religions. And I don't believe that women who say, I feel liberated if I become a Muslim. After all, remember what Islam means, it's submission. When everything is stacked against them. For example, a Muslim man can marry a non-Muslim woman. Non-Muslim Muslim women cannot marry anyway. There are all sorts of things that women in marriage in Islam cannot do and men can do. And I know the quote that you say that they're equal. They are not equal. They're not equal in inheritance. They're not equal in marriage. I think it's extraordinary that white women who have got the choices voluntarily give up choices.
Why is it happening? Why is it happening?
Well, there is actually, women can choose to be masochists, and I'm afraid white women...
Come. That's so patronising. I mean, it's verging on the insulting here. That to think that
I don't mind insulting.
Sorry, can I just finish?
Because I get insulted all the time by Muslims.
I'm not looking to insult you. I just wanted to point out. Well, that to start with, of course. But
what did that gentleman say?
He said Islam is not about white people. I mean, the report, the Swansea report, is of course showing that there are 60% of converts that are white, but there are of course many non-white converts to Islam. And that does need to be pointed out. I think the main issue I see here is that we get bogged down in these intricacies, which are still being very much debated within the Muslim community. This idea that there's a fundamental inequality between men and women, I reject. I'm a Muslim woman and I reject that. There is fundamental equality. And I reject anything in the Quran that you would hold up to say that there isn't. Now, these are the details. These are details that are still being discussed.
Wait, Dayman, Leslie. Let's hear the response from Dayman. Oh, Susan, first of all. I defer to you, Susan.
Women rights before this country did. Women were allowed in Islam to own their own property, to have a job,
Dayman, Leslie.
but not to be able to tell them how to do it.
Okay, let's get Dame and Leslie. Sorry, what did you say there?
I said Muhammad was very feminist for the 7th century. But we can't keep thinking about the solutions for the 7th century for the solutions for the 21st century. I don't blame women who are very confused about their place in society to go to a structure which is very clear about it, which is, for example, if you are married, I don't know, it's okay if your husband takes another 3 wives?
No, and as we discussed earlier with the marriage contract, that's something I can stipulate in my marriage contract. He's not allowed to do that. Yeah,
neither am I.
I would like to come back to the fact that
let's hear from a man. Let's hear from you.
You've divorced you by saying the talaq 3 times.
And I can divorce him too.
Right, let's go to a man. You studied, Leon, over here now. You've studied the whole issue of converts. You're a Muslim yourself. How would anyone watching now who's not a Muslim, who may have only heard bad things, how would I or anyone in the studio, how would our lives be enhanced by conversion to Islam?
Well, I think that the report speaks for itself that's been released, and the statistics show that thousands, tens of thousands of people in the UK are converting to Islam and finding it a better guide for life, as the question says.
Why do we need a guide for life?
Well, I think that's why we have this programme, which is called The Big Questions, because in life there is big questions, and the fact is that people are finding in Islam answers to these questions, and I want to really emphasise that.
You know, there are a lot of questions, and that sometimes there just aren't answers to those questions, and doubt.
Well, Muslims believe that there are answers, and they believe that there is a God, and I think that these ladies that
can I just put something else to you? Because,
many others.
Wait, one second. I think it's important. I think this is important because it provides people with a certainty, and the other side of that argument is that, well, actually certainty is not necessarily a good thing. Doubt and asking questions are what have driven progress and have driven discovery in our world.
And Islam is not a rigid religion, and it has different interpretations, and there are different approaches to Islam and different ways of understanding Islam. But I just want to emphasise one point, which is that these ladies who are educated, intelligent ladies in the audience, who replicate many other women who are out there, and men and women, who are converting to Islam, are investigating the religion after extensive study, as has already been mentioned, and often there's a reluctance to convert to Islam. So the fact that people convert to Islam, even after so much study and reluctance, I think it really shows that people are finding it a very credible alternative to answer these questions.
You went the other way. You were a Muslim, and now you've converted to Judaism. That's a small step for man and a giant leap
Messianic
for
Judaism,
mankind.
Believing in the Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus of Nazareth. Messianic Judaism.
What was Messianic Judaism?
Yes.
Okay. What? So you believe in Jesus?
Absolutely, I believe in him as a personal saviour, and I believe in the eternal mighty God.
Right. What was the problem with Islam for you?
Well, I want to focus in first on the idea that Islam is the only religion on this earth. What we have to understand is the moral fibre of this society has broken down so much that last week, for instance, on one of your shows, you had this pastor who said he was a pastor for X number of years, yet he didn't believe in God. So when you have these kind of pastors, and pastors who sit in audiences and say, well, you know, we can debate certain things out of the Bible and disagree with them, then you're going to find young ladies, British ladies, are confused, and they're going to go to Islam because that's the most obvious choice.
Leaving the faith is very much disapproved of, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. But the thing is, in my case, I came over to the truth. I went beyond Islam. Didn't stop at the 7th century. I went to the time of Moses. I went to the time of Abraham, to the time of Yahushua, Jesus the Messiah. And I found truth there. That's where I knew the truth is.
Gentlemen here, wait a minute, David, in a second. Yeah, General, you've got a book there. Is it a quote from the book, or are you just...
I'll be quoting from this.
Right, go on. The end of faith, yeah?
The Hadith has lots of rather nasty edicts in it. It is apparently the sayings and edicts of the Prophet Muhammad. And, for example, paradise is in the shadow of swords. And the penalty of death for apostasy also comes from the Hadith. It isn't in the Quran.
Then they would say we have to put this into the... Wait a minute, no. We have to put this, they argue, into the context of the 7th century and those aforementioned tribal squabbles. What troubles you about Islam, if anything, Jonathan?
Well, I mean, I think I'd be very careful not to caricature Islam.
Thank you.
Knowing within Christianity how many different viewpoints there are, I'm sure the same exists within Islam, and it's all about the interpretation of the scriptures. Christianity has changed its view on, keeping of slaves, the place of women, the Sabbath, even on war, many times. But what I am, I think, attracted to Christianity about is its forgiveness and its love of enemies, not just, I'll forgive you if you repent.
Love those who persecute you.
But love those who bless those who persecute you.
Can I
maybe that is within Islam, but I haven't seen... No, my religion is one of Jesus on the cross, who, while the nails were being banged into God, and his hands and his feet, and being put to death, he said, I forgive.
Well, there's a very...
that is a powerful thing.
There's a very well-known saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, forgive him who wrongs you, do good to him who does injustice against you, and forgive those that wrong you. So it's
so
all
long as
very
they
much
repent.
No, you're quoting something else. This is a quoting from the Prophet Muhammad.
School of Islam
No,
you
it
study.
doesn't. This is a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But I think
Why do you always have to say peace be upon him every time you mention his name? Does he require that?
You don't have to, but it's really it's a really nice marker of respect for prophets in general, and I would say the same for Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, that, these are people that have extremely high esteem in our regard. But I think it's important to point out, we were talking about the reasons why people convert to religion. This is not a loony decision that people are making. You have to look that for a lot of people, they've investigated different faiths, they've done a lot of research, and they've come to look into the truth claims of various religions and come to this conclusion.
We have to leave it there. Thank you so much for all your contributions. Thank you for coming in, and thank you for being such a good audience today. Join us next week from Bristol, and goodbye from everyone here in Leicester. See you next week.